They handed the key to my room to a complete stranger, and I was pushed out. No warning, no apology, just a look, like I didn't belong. My name is Autumn Rayne, a final year architecture student at the University of Chicago. I lived on the 8th floor of Jefferson Hall, a place I'd called home for 3 whole years, until I left for a 3-day group trip and came back to find all my belongings shoved into the hallway. My room had someone else in it. My roommate, Ivy, simply said, "We thought you weren't coming back." I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't beg, but 2 weeks later, they got a letter from the new owner of the entire 8th floor. It was me. I didn't expect a celebration when I came back, but I didn't expect to be erased either. 3 years. That room had been mine for 3 entire years. Room 816. Jefferson Hall, University of Chicago. It wasn't just a space, it was home. My plants knew that windowsill. My sketches littered the desk. And Ivy, my roommate, used to say she couldn't fall asleep without hearing my pen scratch across the paper. We were more than roommates. We were friends. Or so I thought. Over spring break, our architecture cohort got an opportunity to visit Portland for a 3-day urban design tour. I told Ivy. I told the front desk. I even left a note on the mini whiteboard stuck to our door back Sunday night. Don't touch the banana bread in the fridge. I left my things behind: laptop, art supplies, my blanket, everything, because it never crossed my mind that I wouldn't come back to that room. But when I did, I walked into a hallway buzzing with noise and fluorescent lights, and my heart dropped. My suitcase was on the floor. My sketch pads, loosely packed in a cardboard box, were bent and disorganized. Someone had crumpled my coat into a bag, and the door to 816. It was open. Inside, a girl I'd never seen was hanging fairy lights above the bed I used to sleep in. She looked back at me like I was the one intruding. I stood there, blinking. I thought it was a prank, some weird mix-up. But then Ivy stepped into view. Her arms were crossed, her voice robotic. "Autumn, we didn't know if you were coming back. So, housing reassigned the room." Just like that. 3 years. Replaced in 3 days. I tried to laugh, and I even waited for her to say, "Just kidding," but she didn't. She wouldn't even meet my eyes. I turned to the housing manager, who just happened to be making rounds down the hallway. She looked at me like I was causing a scene. "You didn't submit a room hold request," she said. "Per policy, we had to reallocate." I opened my mouth, then closed it, because if I spoke, I would have screamed. Instead, I nodded slowly, picked up my crushed sketch pad, and walked down the hall. Every step felt like stepping out of a memory. They didn't care where I'd sleep. They didn't ask. They just decided I was gone. I slept in the 24-hour library lounge that night. My name still on the building registry, but nowhere to go. I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. They didn't just take my room. They took my place in a world I helped build. So I made a quiet promise to myself. I wasn't going to ask for the room back. I was going to own the entire floor. I thought the worst part was losing my room. It wasn't. The worst part was realizing no one thought I mattered enough to tell me. I sent an email to the housing office the next morning. It was calm, polite, respectful. I attached a copy of the email I'd sent to Ivy before leaving for Portland. The note I left on the whiteboard. A time-stamped group message showing I told everyone where I was going. And I waited. 24 hours later, the reply came in. "Per current occupancy policy, your room assignment is no longer active. You may reapply for placement if interested." Reapply as if I was a stranger. As if 3 years of rent and community meant nothing. I went to the housing office in person. The woman at the desk didn't even look up at first. When she did, her tone was clipped. "All reassignments are final." I asked for a supervisor. She gave me a number to call. I called it voicemail. I waited an hour outside the office. Finally, a manager appeared, younger than I expected. Too polished to care. "I'm sorry," she said, but her mouth moved like she'd said it 100 times. "There's nothing we can do. You didn't formally notify us, and your roommate signed an internal change request. I blinked. Ivy requested a new roommate. She hesitated. Technically, she requested a better fit for the semester. My chest went cold. I had never yelled at Ivy, never betrayed her. I shared everything with her. Late-night snacks, secrets, struggles, laughter. And in the end, she crossed out my name with a single checkbox. I walked out of that office without another word. That night, I messaged Ivy, short, direct. I don't understand. She read it, didn't reply. But a few hours later, she posted a photo online, her and the new roommate. Twinkly lights, matching robes, takeout sushi. Captioned, "Finally, peace." Peace was I the war all along. A part of me wanted to scream, to call her, to demand why. But I didn't. Because deep down, I knew the answer. It was easy to forget someone quiet. It was convenient to replace the girl who never demanded space. And now, they all moved on like I never existed. I found a temporary room at the student co-op down the block. Nothing like Jefferson Hall. No view, no desk. Shared bathroom with 6 girls. But it gave me space to think. Because if they wanted to pretend I was invisible, then I'd make sure my comeback was impossible to ignore. I started researching the building itself. Jefferson Hall had always looked like school property, but something didn't add up. The policies, the privatized mailroom, the independent leases. Then I found it. A line buried deep in an archived newsletter, Jefferson Hall acquired in 2016 by Midland Residential Holdings as part of a student housing pilot. Private ownership. I dug deeper. Midland had been quietly offering floor-level purchase deals to alumni and education partners interested in investing in student spaces. Each floor had its own parcel ID. Each parcel could be sold. And guess what floor had been under review for months? Pending the right buyer, floor 8. The one they threw me out of. The one they thought I didn't deserve. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did neither. I started drafting a proposal. It was wild, audacious, unrealistic. But so was what they did to me. I reached out to Professor Moore, my old architecture mentor. I showed him my concept, a redesigned student living environment that promoted creative collaboration, shared studio nooks, quiet pods, resource libraries. He didn't laugh. He stared at it for a long moment, then said, "You know, I have a friend in the Alumni Venture Board who might want to see this." 2 days later, I was in a glass-walled office across town, pitching to 2 women in tailored blazers. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I told them the truth, that students like me, quiet, serious, overlooked, needed a place to exist. And that giving me the chance to buy floor 8 wouldn't just be poetic, it would be profitable. They asked questions. They gave notes. They nodded slowly. By the end of the meeting, one of them smiled. "You're gutsy," she said. "We like gutsy." That night, I walked home under the glow of the city skyline. I didn't have approval yet. I didn't have funding. But I had something no one could take away again. My place. My vision. My voice. And this time, I was using it. The next morning, I woke up with one thought circling in my mind. No one is going to hand me my space back. I have to claim it. I went to class, showed up at the co-op dinner, smiled when I needed to, but every free minute I had, I was working, revising blueprints, creating cost models, researching zoning allowances. If I was going to pitch this floor as more than student housing as a creative haven, I had to be precise. The girls in my co-op started noticing. One of them, Lena, asked, "Are you building a house or a revolution?" I smiled. Maybe both. Week 2, I got the call. Midland Residential Holdings was willing to schedule a formal review, a real shot, but I needed backing. So I called in a favor. During a charity design auction last year, I'd helped a boutique real estate investor showcase his minimalist modular units. In return, he'd said, "If you ever need a foot in the door, call me." I called him. He answered on the second ring, and by the end of that day, I had a letter of financial interest, a conditional partner. and the validation of someone the board respected. It was all happening, quietly, strategically, and above all, legally. I didn't breathe a word of it to anyone at Jefferson Hall. Not to Ivy, not to the new roommate, not even to Professor Moore, once the paperwork started moving. I didn't want recognition. I wanted restoration, not of a room, but of my dignity. 3 weeks later, I signed the preliminary agreement. I wasn't the official owner yet, but I was locked in. All that remained were internal inspections and final board approval. And then it came. A generic email sent to all residents of Floor 8. Effective next term, Floor 8 will undergo structural updates under new floor-level ownership. For questions, please contact the new operations liaison. My name, in the footer, in bold. 2 hours later, Ivy called me. I didn't answer. She texted, "Is this real? What's going on?" I left her on read, because sometimes silence is louder than a scream. I walked past Jefferson Hall that night, just to look up at the 8th floor windows, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled without bitterness. This wasn't about revenge. It was about rewriting the rules. If they thought I was just a quiet girl who disappeared easily, they were about to learn what it looked like when she owned the ground beneath their feet. The thing about power is, it doesn't always look like power. Sometimes, it looks like a clipboard, a name on a lease, a signature at the bottom of a contract, and for the first time in my life, I had all three. It became official 2 weeks after the announcement. I was now the legal owner of Floor 8 in Jefferson Hall, not as a tenant, not as a student, but as a developer, a private floor sponsor, a name in the building's stakeholder registry. The transition was quiet, just how I wanted it. No press, no ribbon cutting, just a line-item transfer and a midweek update email. But the effects weren't quiet. Day 1. I replaced the old fluorescent lights with soft daylight LEDs. Day 2. I installed smart locks on every unit, only I had the override code. Day 3. I sent a memo, effective immediately. All residents of Floor 8 must attend a floor meeting this Friday. Attendance mandatory. Ivy showed up late, wearing a beanie she used to steal from my side of the room. She didn't recognize me at first. I was seated at the front, next to the building's property manager. When I stood up and introduced myself, the entire room fell silent. I could hear someone whisper, "No way," but it was real. I looked every single person in the eye, including the girl who now lived in what used to be my room. And I said, "This floor is under new stewardship. My goal is to create a student living experience that values creativity, quiet focus, and mutual respect." A few people nodded, most just stared. Then Ivy raised her hand. "Wait. What does this mean for us? For me?" I didn't blink. It means no one gets evicted for going on a 3-day trip. It means policies will be clear, consistent, and fair. It also means all roommate placements are now under review. Her face paled. I paused, then added, "Some of you will be asked to move. Based on community fit and conduct, that process begins next week." I didn't call her out by name. I didn't have to. Over the weekend, I began transforming my old room. I removed the twin beds and replaced them with a shared workspace. I covered the ceiling with acoustic panels. One wall became a chalkboard mural already filled with equations, timelines, and small sketches left by curious residents. It was no longer a bedroom. It was a creative incubator. No one could live there. It wasn't about living anymore. It was about building something permanent. On Monday, Ivy left an envelope at my door. No return name. Just a note inside, "I didn't know you were capable of this. I'm sorry." But sorry didn't undo what was done. Sorry didn't fold my blanket the way I used to. Didn't care about the banana bread I'd left in the fridge. Didn't stop her from turning me into a ghost. I filed her for relocation. 2 weeks later, she was gone. No drama, no confrontation. Just an empty room with no shared history left in it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. More changes came quickly. I partnered with the design faculty to launch a student-led showcase on Floor 8 every quarter. I opened room 812 to host free mentorship sessions for undergrads in creative majors. I hired 2 student interns to help manage logistics, both of whom had once told me they felt too invisible to matter. I made sure they never felt that again. The university started to take notice. My floor had higher retention, better feedback, and fewer complaints than any other in the building. Midland offered to let me sit in on board meetings. I declined the first time, but not the second. It wasn't just about the floor anymore. It was about voice, impact, ownership. Everything I was told I didn't deserve, because I was too quiet, too polite, too forgettable. They remembered me now. Even Ivy. I saw her once in the dining hall, sitting alone. She didn't wave, neither did I. But for the first time, I didn't feel small around her. I felt solid, grounded, whole. Because in the end, I didn't take back a room. I built a foundation, and this time, no one gets to erase me from it. People began knocking on my door, not literally, always, but with emails, requests, invitations. I'd gone from being forgotten to being needed. Funny how fast the world turns once you own something they want access to. Floor 8 became a magnet. Students wanted to transfer up. Faculty asked to use rooms for seminars. Even the dean of student housing stopped by just to chat. I played it cool. I wore neutral colors. I smiled without smiling too much, because I knew power doesn't raise its voice. It just holds the key. And I held the key now. But something kept gnawing at me. What had happened to me wasn't just personal. It was systemic. A pattern. I wasn't the only student who'd been displaced, silenced, rearranged without consent. So I started collecting stories from co-op friends, from art majors, even from engineering students too scared to speak up. I listened, I took notes, I asked questions. Then I built something new. A digital platform. Simple. Anonymized. Secure. A space where students could log housing injustices, roommate hostility, lease violations, unannounced inspections. Within a week, there were over 70 submissions. By the end of the month, there were more than 300. Some were small. Forgotten maintenance requests. Others were chilling threats from roommates. Racial targeting, forced relocations. It wasn't just me. It had never been just me. So I sent a proposal, not to the housing office, to the board of Midland Residential Holdings. Title Student-Centered Housing: A Vision from the Inside. I included my platform data, suggested a feedback loop between residents and management, outlined a training model for floor-level coordinators. I didn't ask for funding. I asked for access to pilot the program, officially, on floor 8. They approved it in 5 days. Suddenly, I wasn't just a floor owner. I was a systems designer. And floor 8 wasn't just a living space, it was a case study. We implemented feedback portals, anonymous support tickets, community check-ins, and the vibe changed. People started making eye contact in the hallway again. The walls, once dull beige, were now hand-painted with murals reflecting our diverse student body. Quotes, symbols, flags. Every inch became intentional. I began mentoring 2 freshmen, Jamila and Cody. They'd both almost dropped out after being reassigned multiple times in their first semester. They had no stability, no sense of belonging. I gave them space and a purpose. Jamila helped run the digital housing feedback hub. Cody handled design logistics and data reports. They blossomed, and watching them grow made me realize something deeper. This was never about the room. It was about legacy. What would I leave behind? What could I build that would outlive the pain I carried? So I started drafting the next big plan, a full-floor renovation turning floor 8 into a multi-use residential innovation hub, live workspaces, studios, mini-pods, accessible units, cultural lounges, not just for architects, for thinkers, artists, planners, strategists. But I needed funding, more than I could afford. So I stood where I'd once been rejected at the university grant board, and I presented my plan. 12 minutes, no filler, no apologies. And at the end, an older professor raised her hand and said, "Weren't you the girl they kicked out?" I nodded. Yes. And that's why I built something better. We got full approval. Construction was scheduled for summer. I returned to my co-op housing that night and sat quietly on the rooftop, looking out at the windows of Jefferson Hall. One of them flickered. It used to be mine. Now it belonged to everyone. The same hallway where I'd once been erased was now filled with voices louder than mine had ever been. And for the first time, I didn't need to speak to be heard. They gave my room to a stranger, but I gave that stranger a voice. And in return, I got something bigger than a room. I got a legacy. The final inspection came on a Wednesday. Rain hit the windows like it had something to say. I stood in the middle of what used to be room 816. No longer a bedroom, no longer mine. Now, it was a floor-wide commons with collaborative desks, a living green wall, and a digital display showing student projects. The inspector nodded with quiet approval. He didn't know what it used to look like. He only saw what it had become. But I remembered everything. The sound of Ivy's laughter echoing late at night. The cheap curtains that never closed all the way. The banana bread I left on the second shelf. The silence that followed, when they gave my key to someone else. I hadn't cried since that day, not out of pride, just necessity. But now, standing on a floor I legally owned, inside a room I had redesigned to be free from ownership entirely. A single tear rolled down. I didn't wipe it away. Because this was not weakness, this was release. Final approval came 2 days later. I received the confirmation via email while sitting at Cafe Urbana, surrounded by blueprints and half-drunk coffee. Subject FLO8 Innovation Hub full certification granted. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I closed the laptop and walked out into the cold Chicago air. No coat, just breath and certainty. I'd done it. I'd transformed a space where I was erased into a space where others could finally exist. But it didn't stop there. Nothing worth building ever does. The floor's success led to more meetings. I was invited to speak at the Urban Campus Design Conference. I presented a panel at the National Student Housing Symposium. People started calling me a young visionary. But that's not what I felt like. I felt like a girl who once slept on the floor of a library and decided no one else should have to. I still lived in the co-op. I still took night classes. Still ate cheap ramen when deadlines were tight. But my voice carried differently now. It filled rooms I used to be invisible in. And then something unexpected happened. A knock on my office door. I opened it. It was Ivy. She looked different. Not in clothes or hair, but in presence. Smaller, hesitant. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, looking around at the redesigned layout, the smartboards, the project wall, the student mural by Jamila. She didn't say anything for a while. Then finally I thought I was doing the right thing. "I didn't know you'd become this." I leaned against the edge of the table. "You didn't have to know. You just had to care." Silence again. She nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." This time, the apology wasn't a folded note. It was a person, present, vulnerable. I could have dismissed her. I could have reminded her of the cold hallway, the box of my sketch pads, the sushi post captioned, "Finally, peace." But I didn't. Not because I forgave easily, but because I'd already moved beyond it. "This space isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about possibility. If you want to help build that, there's room." Ivy's eyes widened, not with guilt, with surprise. She didn't expect grace. People rarely do, when they know they've burned a bridge. She offered a tentative smile, and I nodded. Nothing else needed to be said. Weeks later, she joined the volunteer team for community engagement, not as my friend, not as a project partner, but as someone willing to learn, willing to unlearn. And maybe that's enough. Graduation came faster than I expected. My name was called near the end. I crossed the stage, took my diploma, waved to Jamila, to Cody, to the girls from the co-op who painted floor 8's staircase by hand. No family in the crowd, but I didn't feel alone, because everything I built stood with me. 1 week after graduation, I got a call. Midland wanted to expand the pilot, They offered me a permanent position, Director of Residential Innovation, Midwest Division. 26 years old. No trust fund. No safety net. Just a name that used to be crossed out, now printed in bold at the top of a contract. I signed it. They gave my room to a stranger, but I bought the entire floor. Then I filled it with light. And now, I design the blueprints that decide who gets to stay and who gets to thrive. Because the quiet girl they tried to forget, she didn't disappear. She rebuilt everything.